Over on Jaguar Gear 7, a new baseball video is out. In this video, we talk about the player who was upset that he got called up to Major League Baseball. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. Do teams and coaching staffs ever tank? Do they ever try and give their team a worse chance at winning and try and increase their odds in the NFL draft of getting a better pick? Despite what people might want to believe, and despite what might actually be in the best interests of the organization in the long run, as I'm sure the Houston Texans can attest to with their Week 18 Hail Mary win, no, they do not. You play to win the game. Herm Edwards said it best. No coach is going to be crazy enough to intentionally decrease his team's chances at winning and to put his team in a bad spot come Sunday. Do that, and so much can go wrong. You can lose the trust of the players in your locker room. You can get blackballed from the league and it can face some pretty hefty fines and suspensions. You can lose your job and torpedo your chances of getting another one. I could go on and on. But to make a long story short, no, coaches do not tank. They have a goal, to try to win the game with the roster that they're given. And 99.9% of the time, to suggest that a coach would tank shows blatant disrespect and a severe lack of understanding for the profession at hand. Which is why I bring this story up. Because during Week 16 of the 1981 season, when the Cleveland Browns and the Seattle Seahawks faced off against each other in this game right here that you've been watching this whole time, the real drama wasn't necessarily what was taking place on the field, but rather what was taking place off of it. Because in the build-up to the game, people accused Cleveland Browns head coach Sam Rutigliano of tanking to try and improve Cleveland's draft position and increase their chances at losing the game. But not just any group of people, not uninformed fans or a radio host or media pundit looking to create some headlines and drum up some controversy. Try the head coach of the opposing team, Jack Patera. Imagine the coach on the other side, flat out saying that the other team is not trying to win the game, and the head coach is tanking. Well, that's exactly what happened in this absolutely bizarre feud. Because this is the story of the bizarre drama in 1981 between the Cleveland Browns and the Seattle Seahawks. Before I talk about the controversy in question and the comments made by Patera that led people to raise their eyebrows and led to a ton of angry folks, we need some context to understand the importance of this game, what was on the line, and what specifically the Browns were planning to do for this game that was different from their other games. It's December 20th, 1981. It's the final Sunday of the NFL season, and we have an AFC battle on our hands over at the Kingdom between the Seattle Seahawks and the Cleveland Browns. Now, there are some times where you get incredibly lucky with Week 16, or whatever the final week of the season is, and you get a game that means a ton, and that draws national attention, and that the football world is fixated on. And you had plenty of those games in 1981, from the NFC East battle between the Dallas Cowboys and New York Giants to get the Giants into the playoffs, to the battle between the Green Bay Packers and New York Jets, where the Jets needed to win to clinch a playoff spot, to the winner-take-all battle for the NFC Central between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Detroit Lions, where the winner won the division and the number 3 seed, and the loser would be left out of the playoff picture entirely. This game between the Seahawks and the Browns? Yeah, this was not one of those games. This was a battle between two teams that, outside of pride, didn't have anything to play for, as they had some incredibly disappointing and poor seasons. Both teams entered this game with identical records of 5-10, well out of the playoff picture, and had two of the worst point differentials in the AFC, with the Browns sitting third from the bottom at -78, and the Seahawks sitting second from the bottom at -87. For what it's worth, the Colts were dead last. After starting off 5-6, the Browns dropped 4 straight games heading into this one. Meanwhile, the Seahawks had dropped 3 of their last 4, so neither team was exactly entering this game on a high note. This was just one of those games where you play it, and then you move on to next season and try to put 1981 behind you as best as possible. And one of the reasons why the Browns were struggling in 1981, despite winning the AFC Central and going 11-5 the year before, was the play of this man right here, Brian Sipe. In 1980, Sipe was named the MVP of the league as he threw 30 touchdown passes and 4,132 yards, ranking second in the league in both categories, as well as first in passer rating with a rating of 91.4. He was perhaps the main reason that the Browns were good in 1980. And in 1981, he was one of the main reasons that they were bad. The 1981 season was anything but an MVP caliber year for Sipe, as he ended the season with 25 passes intercepted, which was the worst total in the league. For Sipe, who completed 61% of his passes in 1980, his completion percentage dipped by over 5 points in 1981. After a 91.4 passer rating in 1980, it dipped by nearly 25 points to 68.2 in 1981, going from first place to 22nd place. And after throwing 30 touchdowns in 1980, that dipped to 17 in 1981, getting cut nearly in half. You name any major stat, and not only did Sipe's production decline, but it declined by a noticeable amount, to the point where perhaps no player has had as steep of a drop-off from an MVP season as Sipe did. In Cleveland's last 7 games before this one against Seattle, they were just 1-6, and unsurprisingly, Sipe's numbers in that stretch were terrible. Over that 7-game stretch, he completed just 52% of his passes, threw 6 touchdowns and 14 picks, which is a touchdown to interception ratio worse than 1-2, and had a passer rating of 57.2 while taking 21 sacks. For some perspective on how abysmal he was over the second half of the season, from games 9 through 15, only one quarterback threw more interceptions than he did, and that was Tommy Kramer of the Minnesota Vikings. Out of the 40 quarterbacks to throw at least 50 passes in that stretch, Sipe ranked 35th in passer rating, and only one quarterback took more sacks than he did, and that was Mark Wilson of the Oakland Raiders. Bottom line, over the second half of the season, as crazy as it might seem since he won MVP not even 12 months before, you could make a legitimate argument that Brian Sipe was the worst starting quarterback in football. And because of Sipe's struggles and the fact that this was the final game of the season, Cleveland Browns head coach Sam Rutigliano decided that it was time for a change at quarterback. Sort of. Sipe would get the start, and he'd play the first quarter or so. Sipe would get the right to keep his starting streak going, and to have the honor of starting every game for the Browns in 1981. However, right around the second quarter or so, he'd be taken out of the game for this man right here, Paul McDonald. McDonald was chosen in the 4th round of the 1980 NFL Draft, and hadn't gotten too many chances to step into the game and show himself. He had only thrown 23 career passes by this point. But the Browns figured it was time to give him a shot and see what he could do. As Rutigliano said on why he was doing this, "I hope we can let Paul play as much as 3 quarters. It won't make or break his future, but all the playing time we can give him under game conditions will make him better. We already know McDonald will be a fine quarterback, so we can help his development by letting him play." And when you put it like that, yeah, that makes perfect sense. There's nothing about what Rutigliano was doing here that seemed out of the ordinary. Give the youngsters some playing time to see what you have, and because your starter has been largely ineffective. All in all, especially with that context provided, it's a perfectly sound and appropriate strategy. But there was one man that was absolutely furious about this. That man? Oddly enough, not Brian Sipe, not a player on the Browns. Try a person on the coaching staff of the opposing Seahawks. Try this man right here, Jack Patera. Because in Patera's eyes, what the Browns were doing by experimenting like this was a black eye on the sport. Seriously. He absolutely lambasted Rutigliano and company for having the audacity to bench last year's MVP for Paul McDonald. At first, Patera said when he was informed of this game plan, we're not planning any experimenting like that. There's no reason to change our approach to this game. We want to make sure the things we're doing will benefit us next year. The translation there seems pretty simple. This doesn't help the Browns out at all, and to experiment is stupid. But it's one thing to call out another team's coaching staff and criticize what they're doing. It's another to completely question whether they're trying to win, and whether they have any competitive integrity whatsoever. Because Patera continued, saying on the Browns playing Paul McDonald under center, they're playing for that draft slot. He accused the Browns of trying to throw this game to intentionally better their draft position and leapfrog a few teams, including the Seahawks, in the order. And to just blatantly call out the Browns for tanking like that? Yeah, you can bet that the Browns did not take too kindly to those comments by Patera, because they immediately fired back and said that it was ridiculous for anyone, especially an opposing team and an opposing head coach, to assume that they were tanking. Said Rutigliano on Patera's comments, "We want to win this game. It's preposterous to even get into this dialogue about the draft. The final win just puts a good taste in your mouth. It adds to the positive side of the year." Rutigliano continued, saying, "If we believe we will be winners in 1982, then it's important to win in Seattle. Most of the people who will play the Seahawks game will be with us in 1982, and we have to take that step to feeling like a winner again. It's not a game for a playoff spot, but it can be a first step to regrouping and getting back some confidence." Translation: how dare you accuse us of tanking? We want to win this game just as much as you guys do. Replacing our starting quarterback doesn't change the fact whatsoever that we're going to go full speed, we're going to give it 100%, and most importantly, we're not going to lay down and tank like you just accused us of doing. With that, a seemingly meaningless game on paper just became pretty meaningful in terms of the drama attached to it. Because it's not every day that you see a team accuse the opposing team of trying to throw the game and even plant that thought into people's minds. So that raises the question, how did this game turn out? Well, as you can tell from the highlights, the Seahawks won absolutely convincingly in front of their home fans, as when all was said and done, the Seahawks beat the Browns by a final score of 42-21, in a game that wasn't even that close. Seattle led 28-0 early in the second quarter, and midway through the third quarter, led it 42-7. Paul McDonald looked alright in relief, throwing for 297 yards and 3 touchdowns. So even though it was garbage time for most of his time under center, the plan to give him some exposure and see if he could do well sort of worked. Brian Sipe, on the other hand, not so much. He went 3 for 6 with no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a passer rating of 36.8, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball to the ground on every single play. Oh, and if you want to know why the Browns lost this game, they somehow managed to turn the ball over 10, count them, 10 times. Some teams don't even get 10 possessions over the course of a game. And somehow, the Browns had 10 turnovers in this one. At least for Seattle's sake and for Patera's sake, they won this game. Because I can't even imagine how awkward that would have been if a head coach accused another head coach of tanking, then lost to the supposed tanking head coach. At least Patera backed up on the field the fact that the Browns were going to put out an inferior product. So we had that going for him at least. This brings us back to the question asked at the top of the video. Do teams try and intentionally lose to improve their draft stock? If you ask Sam Rutigliano, he'd say absolutely not. And to even suggest that is blasphemous. If you ask Jack Patera, he'd say that he witnessed it happen firsthand to close out the 1981 season. Because if anything sums up the Browns and how bad they were that year, it might be this, and the fact that that year, the Browns were so bad that the opposing team thought they were doing it on purpose. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.